I'm Brett Cooper, and this is the Frontline Mobility Edge, where we discuss the latest in mobile device technologies and how they're shaping the frontline landscape of business. Thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Hello, welcome to another episode of the BlueFletch Frontline Mobility Edge podcast. I'm Brett Cooper here, joined with DeHihns today, and we're going to be talking about a survey that we had commissioned with a number of frontline retail associates in North America. The survey was looking at biometric preferences, and it went back a couple of years ago, specific to Lee could probably expound on this. We rolled out a biometric, it was 2018, 2019.
Mhm.
And we got a lot of feedback specifically from legal and HR that employees were not comfortable with biometrics. And I think we had a lot of friction at that point in time. Since then, biometrics has become a lot more commonplace, and we'll talk about that just as a result of some of the data from the survey. But I think that the big finding that we came, and this is 7 years later, is there's not so much of a pushback on biometrics now for employees, but more of a demand. So there's a lot of folks that actually want to use biometrics as opposed to having to type in usernames and passwords in their shifts. And we'll get into this as we cover some of the results from the survey. But I guess, Lee, that's the big takeaway I got out of the results is that it's much different now than it was 7 years ago. Is it the same for you?
Yeah, definitely. And I know a lot of times now with the prospective customers that I'm talking to, more and more biometrics is part of the conversation that they're asking about to see if we have those capabilities.
Yes, I think that we'll start out with just framing this a bit and the terminology that we came up with as we were trying to write about this, or just framing it up, was the last 10 feet, which
Mhm.
is where authentication happens. And I guess, Lee, as we describe this, how do you think about it, or how do you articulate this to clients and folks you're talking with?
Sure. So the last 10 feet would be let's use the example of a retail associate in a store. So a typical frontline shift, they're going to be clocking in on a shared time clock kiosk, in the back or front of the store, logging into a POS terminal to start completing transactions, maybe grabbing a handheld device to either do a cycle count or fulfill a buy online, pick up in store order. Maybe use a tablet for some sort of clienteling or assisted selling, like in a department that requires an associate to be part of that cell, like in flooring, for example, or something like that. And then also maybe they might end their shift on a back office PC, scheduling vacation or doing training. So throughout the course of the day, they're moving all over the place, interacting with four, maybe five different device form factors. And they're spending a lot of time logging into those devices. And that last 10 feet of that interaction is what we're talking about. Isn't There's the organizational job that they have to do, but then there's the actual physical interaction with these devices that they have to work with. And so each of those tasks they're doing, each context is a login event or a login switch or something like that.
Yeah, I always think about there's all these systems that are back in a data center somewhere, but the actual real work happens in that few feet from the time the employee is getting a device or showing a device to a customer or showing something. And the the way we phrase this coming out of that is that with that login friction, or with any login friction, there is a hidden tax.
Yep.
And that hidden tax, it may not seem like a lot, but as it starts to add up, it gets really, really expensive. And I think one of the first questions that was in the survey was asking frontline employees what they do. And when I say frontline employees, the survey was specific to people that are on the floor. I think anybody who works in a back office or was working in HQ got disqualified for the survey. You had to be an employee that is either customer facing, in receiving, in the front end, and doing things on the floor. But so on this, I think one of the next areas that, as we talk about all these authentications that are happening, there is a hidden friction. I call it hidden tax, that it adds up for the employees, adds up for the companies to a lot of money. So as part of the survey, one of the things we asked was how many times employees log in, and the stats, the one that stood out to me is that more than a quarter of the employees logged in more than 15 times a day.
Yeah.
So if you assume those employees are doing username, password, it is a definite burden on them. And then 66% of employees log in to one of their electronic systems more than 5 times a day. So the average is definitely higher. I think we talk about 4.2 to six logins a day. And when we look at some of the numbers from BlueFletch, and it's as you go talk to these retail associates, it's definitely increased over the last 5 or 6 years based on this the survey from the latter half of 2025.
Yeah, and
And
I think the number of apps is only increasing too. I talked to a customer yesterday that has more than 20 applications that their associates are interacting with on those devices.
yeah, so there's a lot more, it is good for employees to have this because they're not having to walk back to an office and do things, but it does create a burden if you don't reduce the friction for employees to use these applications. And I think the next thing I had was this is actually surprised to me. The part of one of the questions was how long it takes employees to log in. And 36% said less than 15 seconds. 37% were in the 15 to 30 second range, and the rest were over 30 seconds. And this was surprising to me because I know we ran it was actually a contest to see how fast people could log in with a fully qualified name and 8-digit password.
Mhm.
And I think the average was around 41 or 42 seconds.
Yeah.
There definitely were some Gen Z folks that came in under 20 seconds. So this stat surprised me a bit, but as I dug into some of the comments, a lot of people are using a new alphanumeric, like POS code as their login, and then are using a PIN to get in. So the less than 15 seconds for a third of the respondents made sense. But even at that, you're taking the average of those numbers, it can add up very, very quickly.
Yeah, and it's still at that point, 73% of the employees are taking more than 15 seconds per login. And so if they're doing that more than 5 times a day and up to 15 times a day, that's an incredible amount of time.
Yeah, and for certain roles, especially like high security, if you're in a POS where you're doing overrides, every time you have one of those context switches that Lee you talked about earlier, you're having to log back in. So it definitely increases those numbers for certain employees.
Yeah, for sure. And that 15 seconds doesn't sound like a lot, but we'll break this out a little bit. But even if you think about it just from store experience from a customer point of view, if you're in line and there's 30 seconds where you're just standing there and nothing's happening, that's going to create a lot of frustration. And if you're trying to get a question asked or answered with an assisted sale and you have to wait 30 seconds, that's also very frustrating. You're like, I just want to know about these headphones. And if you have to wait, that's gonna decrease the wallet share too of each customer. So there's a lot of costs outside of just the labor side of it.
Yeah, there are so many times where there's a local retailer I go to a lot. And if you have a return, the number of times the lady's like, sorry, the computer's really slow today when she's like logging in, it definitely made me think of this stat as I read this. And I guess from a numbers perspective, Lee, do you want to talk about at scale? I think that the number we use as a benchmark is a 10,000 employee retailer. So 10,000 employees doing these logins of, five plus and, more than 30 seconds. You want to talk a bit about what that math's out to?
Yeah, and when we saw these numbers, it blew me away. Like I knew when you're like, hey, 10,000 people, 15 seconds, that's a lot of time. But when you actually math it out, if you have a 10,000 employee retailer, slow logins are going to consume over the course of every day 833 hours. And just to quantify 833 hours, that's like 5 months. So 5 months of one person
One
working.
employee, yeah, working 8
Yeah,
hours
and
a day.
it adds up to $6.2 million annually in just spending time logging in. So that's money that's just walking out the door with nothing to show for it. Another model that used even more conservative assumptions, we found that is about 80,073 hours lost per year on just logins. So it's a crazy amount of time that we're talking about here. So if you can reduce that, you're going to have a huge amount of return on investment from the perspective of if you spend, let's say, 450 to $500,000 on implementing biometrics, you're going to be able to get a return on investment there of 900% on that investment. So it's definitely worth it to spend that kind of money. You'll be able to save about $4.5 million a year.
Yeah, yeah, 10x is a lot. 8 to 10x is a lot on that. And that's between 4 and 6 million a year in savings for 10,000 person. But there is some caveats there, and we'll talk about that in a bit, where we just some of the best practices we learn working with clients on these implementations, and we'll get into that after we get through some more of these survey results. Um,
Yeah,
the next section of the survey, this is a funny one because as I read this, I just made me think of a story I had where, and I think we were asking people about things like the are you satisfied with the current login process you have?
right.
And the the number of people that responded they were satisfied or somewhat satisfied was pretty high. It was like 90%. And it made me think of the story where I went to a retailer once we were doing some scoping and went and talked to one of the guys that did buy online picking in the store. So, I was kind of shadowing this guy, asked him, how do you like the system? He's like, oh, the system's great. I love it. It's pretty awesome. So the guy logs into the app, goes and picks his first item, puts it in a package, puts like a pick ticket on it, and then puts it in the locker area where they did the click and collect or the BOPUS picks. Went back, opened up his device again, logged in, picked an item, and I proceeded to see him do this 4 times. Every single time he logged in, I asked the guy, like, how many times do you log in a day? He's like, like 40 or 50 times. And I
Yeah.
was like, he had said that like he liked the process and he was super happy with it. So I think there's this thing of satisfied doesn't mean happy, or there's people just get used to it and this is just the way it is.
Yeah, exactly. Like acceptance is different than happiness, right? But I think when you drill into those numbers, 90% say they are satisfied. But when you look at the things that are happening, you know, some of the numbers we got back were 35% of the people forget their passwords and PINs. 30% of the people say that logging in takes too long. A quarter of the people experience account lockouts because they've forgotten their passwords and are trying over and over again. 20% of the people say that their passwords and PINs are too complex, so they can't remember them. So when you can't remember a password, you start doing things like writing them down.
Yeah.
So
I think the count lockout one's an interesting one too, because that cost is not just the time of the employee typing in multiple times. If they type it in 3 times, it gets locked. They have to go to the back, pick up a phone, go to the help desk, and then you have that employee off the floor for 10 minutes, and you're spending budget on your IT side of somebody in your support team having to reset their password. So that is actually a very, very expensive transaction right there. I think that I don't remember what it was, but I think it was like $70 every time somebody gets locked out, which
yeah,
if 24% of people are uh, unhappy about frequent lockouts, it sounds like another expensive hidden cost.
yeah. If it's a quarter of your 10,000 person workforce, so that's 2,500 people times $70. And
Yeah.
then that's only if they locked out of their account once.
Yeah, if once a year, and I'm assuming most organizations have a 90-day password policy, so probably take that number times four, and you're probably having about 10,000 of those $70 events a year.
Yeah.
So it gets up there. It gets up there fast. Yeah, it's another $700,000 that's out there for those guys. But yeah, I think the one thing, when you see the 90% are satisfied, and then you see those metrics of things that people are frustrated about, it goes back to exactly what you said, like like being satisfied doesn't mean people like it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, when we look at those numbers, like that 90% number is a little bit misleading when we drill into what we just discussed. And, when you talk to these people about their specific processes around remembering and typing these passwords, dealing with logouts, what that means and interruptions for their workflow. This isn't like a work culture problem. It's a really how you've tooled your workforce and the equipment you've given them to complete their jobs and their tasks just aren't working.
Yeah, which gets us to some of the biometric questions that we had in the survey, and I think the first one is, we wanted to get visibility into, for employees, how comfortable are they just with technology in general, and to get a baseline of that, we looked at, for the survey, what is the different percentage of people across age groups. I think that the first thing of the survey, 61% had worked in retail for more than 5 years. So they've been in retail, they've been around, they've been a lot of times at more than one company. And then the age cohorts, the the middle, I'm going to call it like the 35 to 50 was the biggest cohort, followed very closely by the 25 to 30, and yeah, the 35 to 50 was a bigger group. So I think the majority of respondents were in that 25 to 50 range, and then there was a decent number in that the 50 plus range that were well represented in the survey as well. So it's age range was pretty wide across this. And then the comfort level of technology across all those age ranges, I think it was something like 92% were somewhat comfortable or highly comfortable with technology. And so
Yeah.
it's pretty, everybody, if you look around, everybody has a cell phone. Everybody's used to using different types of technology, which just sort of leads to some of the next points. But there's a lot of people out there that will say, "Oh, we can't roll out this because our employees might not like it," but they're typically more savvy with tech than you realize.
Yeah, I think the employees they want this and they're waiting for you to do it, because they're looking for that personal device experience in their professional life. And when we looked at these stats, I remember when we did this survey, Brett, I personally was surprised by the average tenure of people who had worked in retail. So if it's more than 5 years, and the largest group is 35 to 50, these are seasoned professionals that know what they're doing. This isn't the kind of thing where they're working for 60 days when they're back from college or something like that. So this is a group of people that when they say they want something and they say they know how to use it, I think we can trust that that's a true statement.
Yeah, definitely. And the next thing we got feedback on the survey was just the familiarity with biometrics. And when we talk about biometrics, there's a couple different flavors, but fingerprints and face are probably the two most common, and
Mhm.
that's been driven by Apple and Google over the last 10 years. Actually, 15 years now. I think Apple introduced the fingerprint reader. It was in 2010, and then it was quickly followed by Google and the Android workspace. But I think when we looked at it, 86% of employees said they're familiar with biometric. 61% said they use it every single day on their personal devices, which actually seemed low to me because I know we did some other research before this survey, and 71% of Americans have biometrics turned on their personal cell phone. And that was a
Mhm.
survey done by Cisco, and was definitely a bigger subset. So this might just be a skew of us having a smaller set than the 20,000 people that Cisco surveyed. But
Right.
definitely, I think the big thing is people are familiar with biometrics, and it's normal for them.
Yeah, and it's not like a new normal either. This is what they've been doing for, probably a decade.
Yeah, and then the follow-on question after that was around the openness for biometrics at work. And I think there was, the thing I look for is which who are the people that are hard no, and there were 7% that were not interested or opposed to using biometrics at work, and then of the rest, 57% were very open, 26% were somewhat open, and I think a lot of that was contingent on there were concerns around privacy and security that we'll talk about here in a second. But when you think of 93% of your employees are open to or definitely want to use biometrics for work. And
Mhm.
we'll talk about those reasons why in here in a second. It's definitely a thing that it stood out to me that this is a time when it starts to reevaluate this as an organization, a retailer, and to look at biometrics again.
Yeah, and I think, there was in some of the qualitative comments that came with this survey, biometrics was number one in terms of authentication methodology ahead of badge tap, username and password, barcodes, or tokens. And the statements that support that were biometrics is fast. It's a safe method. I have nothing to lose, nothing to get stolen. It helps me save time, helps me get to work quickly, start my work quickly, and also just makes me stay more efficient.
Yeah, and I think that's a comment from a retail frontline worker. That's not something that Lee made up. And there were
No, I've got it.
there
Yeah,
were
it's in
there were
quotes right here.
there were probably about there were I think of the survey respondents, we did a couple hundred surveys. I think it was 300 plus people responded to the survey. Of those, that is a very common type of response, and I think a lot of people feel like the biometrics is more secure. And the reasons I saw in some of the comments is nobody can steal it. It can't be written down. Somebody, a customer can't look over my shoulder, or a hacker can't look over my shoulder and see me type it in. And
Mhm.
I think those things are, especially some of the newer pieces around like face rec, where you can do liveness detection. It is very difficult to have somebody steal your credential or your token from you. And it used to be with biometrics, if you held up a picture to it, it would, log you in. And now with some of the advances in AI, liveness detection has gotten so good where you can sniff that out very, very quickly.
Yeah, and I think the key here is that your workforce is waiting for you, the IT department, to catch up to the reality of what they're used to on a day-to-day basis. Most people spend hours a week on their phones, and they're rarely typing in passwords, and so outside of their jobs. So I think they're looking for that same thing when they go to work.
Yeah, the next section we had in the survey was actually around biometric preferences for types of biometric. And I'll start with the tail end, which is voice and what was it? I think like voice and palm. So those were things that people are just not as familiar with. And I think that's driven by the fact that it's not something you have in your personal cell phone. So it is, from a voice standpoint, there are also concerns of if I'm sick, my voice isn't going to work. And then on the Palm standpoint, there were questions, and this goes along with some of the things we'll talk about with fingerprint and voice here in a second. But with Palm, people were concerned about what if my hands are dirty? What if what if I'm wearing gloves? It's not going to work as well. Those two were they were pretty low. I would call it low index on what people wanted. The two that people wanted the most are going to be face and fingerprint, and fingerprint was the highest. And I think the reason for that of it was at 61% is what came back in the survey. We're comfortable with using fingerprint scanning,
Yep.
and that aligns very highly to the amount of devices this is in North America, amount of devices in North America that are enabled with fingerprint reading. So the almost all the Android devices have on-screen fingerprint or the backside fingerprint, and then the iOS devices, I think from the 13s and earlier, 13 SEs and earlier are all fingerprints. I think my kids all have the older iPhones that have fingerprint and are super happy with it. But there are issues with fingerprint with shared devices. And Lee, you want to talk a little bit about a couple of those?
Sure. So from a shared device perspective, particularly with Android, there's not a way to store those fingerprints centrally. So they have to be stored on each device,
That's
per
a
G.
that's a Google requirement. That's a GMS Google requirement. They won't let you export fingerprints off the device.
Yeah, that's a GMS requirement. Exactly. And so what that means at a practical level is if you're sharing devices, you'd have to have your fingerprint stored on every device in that store. And there's really no way to know whether or not you've accomplished that. If there's a rack of devices that get moved from the front of the back of the store, things like that, it's just is not something that's scalable. And if you have 10,000 employees, it gets pretty unwieldy.
And I think some of the other concerns and this was in the qualitative section of the survey, was people were worried about the hygiene of even though you're with shared devices, you can touch on the screen. Like the fingerprint reader is a particular spot everybody has to touch on.
Yeah.
So there were some hygiene concerns. Other concerns people called out in the survey was I wear gloves. So you work in a loading dock with gloves on, or work in a cold storage area with gloves, or deli or anywhere else with you have gloves on, or you have wet hands. Fingerprint readers don't work so well.
Mhm.
And then I think the other thing with that is there's certain areas where your hands just get dirty. Like I used to work in receiving in a warehouse, and my hands would be filthy at the end of the shift, and I'm pretty confident that a fingerprint reader would either get clogged up or would not work with my hands when I was working in that role, the warehouse truck unloading jobs. And then I think with face, face, I think 53% were comfortable with face, which actually seems pretty high considering that you know the 60 to 70% of users in North America are using fingerprint. That they more than that was definitely comfortable with face. And I think the advantage of face is you have a model that is pretty consistent, even with beards or with glasses on. The face rec model, especially from Google, work really, really well with determining whether you're the person. And face has pretty good liveness detection. So you can tell the new AI models that are included in a lot of the face models from Google and from Apple are really, really good at detecting whether somebody is alive or not, or whether it's a video. I've played around with a bit, have been unable to spoof it. I'm sure if you tried hard enough, you could, but I've had no success spoofing the new liveness models that are available for face rec.
Yeah, and I think, from a qualitative side, what we saw was the hands-free side is really good. Associates like the hygiene of it, they like the speed of it, and also it just feels secure as well because your face is unique to you, right? And you can't, to your point, spoof that. And it also works really well on not just mobile devices, but it can work on tablets that have cameras and even on POS systems that have cameras as well. So it's nice to be able to use the same methodology on different form factors as you move throughout your day.
Yeah, and I guess the next thing to think about is there's advantages for different departments within a retail organization. I think we talked about the dual ROI, and I talked about a bit of this earlier. Like when with the help desk calls, that goes to the IT budget when somebody has to be on a help desk call. And the
Mhm.
opposite side, the guy who's calling is going towards the COO's budget. So you have operations and you have IT, and both of those organizations in a situation where you improve authentication are going to get savings. So it is a what do they call, what do we call it? A dual ROI for the amount of money you can save. And I guess, Lee, are there other things as you start looking at it outside of just the basic like time spent and the IT savings for the help desk calls that you've seen or we've observed through some of these survey comments?
Yeah, from a qualitative side, at the frontline worker level, the lack of friction in the workday just adds so much more of a sense of well-being in terms of getting rid of that frustration. And it goes back to the satisfied versus happy side of things, where people will log in every time they need to do a transaction if that's what the machine makes them do, and they're just going to make their peace with it. But they don't, if they don't have to do that, that's going to be just a much more pleasant experience. And there's a cost in that too, from the perspective of retention. So we haven't really even talked about that from the point of view of if people are less frustrated, if they have 5 or 7 micro frustrations every shift, times 10,000 people times 8 hours a day, that adds up to a lot of retention issues over time. So I think if you can keep people happy, feeling like they're able to get their jobs done without a ton of frustration, that's another way that you can make this make a ton of sense for your organization.
Yeah, I think the retention side also is it's not just the operational frontline side. You also have the IT side because I think I can't remember the survey. I think it was an IBM survey I read that 70% of help desk calls were password resets.
Yeah.
And I, I've done some help desk and insert when I was younger, and like those are the least fun problem to go solve. I would rather be solving more complex problems and helping people with advanced things like figuring out how to, get the ledger correct in this app or how to get you a certain view that helps them be productive. I don't want to be doing the same, password reset process over and over again. So I think even on the IT side, it probably helps with retention of your help desk and your support staff.
That would be an interesting survey, I think, on that side. Like survey the help desk and see how you can make their jobs better.
Yeah, we didn't include them in this one, but it would be interesting. And I would, based on my experiences, I would say I would rather not be doing passive resets and just focus on some of the more interesting, complex problems that your help desk could be helping out with.
Exactly.
I think the next area, and we talked a bit about the other advantages of like driving down tickets, but I think we talked about or thought about some of the principles just based on our experiences, from the BlueFletch standpoint of rolling out biometrics of what we've learned with biometric rollouts and sort of we call it the 7 principles for rolling out retail biometrics. But the first one is, I guess we titled it associates centered authentication, just starting with the associate. Can you talk a bit about that, Lee, and how you think about that or talk about that with clients?
Yeah, sure. So, broadly, I think the term I tend to use the most is user experience, but what that really means is the associate-centered authentication is going to lead with the methodology of login that your associates prefer, not just making them do something uh, that meets your minimum criteria from a security perspective. So you want to think about the high frequency with which your associates are using things like the point of sale system, time clock, any shared device, any back office PC. And you need to be thinking about what is going to make that experience for them as preferable and as frictionless as possible. So you're going to be, the things you're looking for here are speed, simplicity, and convenience. You don't want to make it nice to haves or anything like that, but you can make this process very pleasant for these people and keep it secure. So I think that's what we're talking about in this situation. And so if you're leading with biometrics, you want to have some biometric fallbacks. But one, you can do it in a way that is going to be still acceptable. So things you can have as biometric fallback would be like a badge plus PIN. And then kind of worst case, I guess, would be password, username and password. And the reason you want to have those things is you want to have the ability for people with different accessibility needs to have different ways to log in. You also want to account for people who are strong objectors, that 7% that we talked about earlier. And then also for edge conditions, maybe somebody's injured, maybe there's a network issue, maybe they have to wear a mask based on their particular role, like if they're in a clean room or something like that. So you have to take all that into consideration, but really start with the associate experience, not the CISO security experience. I think that's table stakes for sure, but then you need to go that extra step and look at how are the associates going to be using this maybe up to 30 times a day.
Yeah, I think the next area was, thinking about your your vendors and questions for those vendors, really thinking about, what are the different systems you have out there. This goes back to, I think, the what you started out with. If you have all these different systems, where should you go plug things in and start with? And I think it's really comes down to the high frequency of, if you have a system that somebody uses 20 times a day. Back to my example of the guy who's doing the picks.
Yeah.
That's a great place to start. You don't have to boil the ocean and put biometrics everywhere. You just have to say, here's the thing that would make it the smoothest. So go look at your software, go look at your hardware vendors, and just figure out where you can plug that in. So just have a general sense of that hardware landscape for your different vendors from both the hardware and software side.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. If you are going to be reliant to some extent on your vendor software that you purchased as well. So pushing them toward to think this way too, I think is critical.
Yeah, and yeah, the hardware too. I've definitely seen some mobile devices and computers and things that don't support cameras or don't have a camera on it. So it can get I can't remember who it was, but it was somebody like, we don't do biometrics, and I looked at their device SKUs, and they only did rear facing cameras for the device SKUs because they wanted to save $20 per device. And I was like, sorry, you're gonna have to stick with NFC badge tap or with passwords for now.
Yeah. Would you rather save $6.2 million dollars? I think is another way to look at that same question.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean 10,000 devices times $20. They did save 200,000, but yeah, the ongoing cost, there's a lot of hidden costs there.
Yeah.
The next thing I think on the list of just thinking about implementation is privacy by design. And I think this is really important and goes back to a lot of the things that were articulated in the qualitative section from the feedback from employees we surveyed. And they privacy was a concern. They don't want their face stolen, even though they got 10 trillion pictures on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. They are worried about their biometric data being stolen, which is I've definitely seen some concerns with this recently in various scenarios. But I guess, Lee, as you think about the privacy by design part of this, what comes to mind for you?
Sure. So I think, the trustworthiness for that employee is what they're looking for. So when you're storing this information, you want to store a biometric template, not a raw image, right? Or no, there's no actual face photo or fingerprint image that's being stored. You want to make sure that those templates that you're using, like for the face template or fingerprint template, are encrypted when they're in transit and when they're in storage. And then we talked about this too from the fingerprint side of things on Android devices with GMS. You want to understand the trade-off of storing something on device versus a central encrypted storage. Just the security that you need to think about with that, but then also the scalability if you're doing everything on device. And then what you want to do as well to alleviate these concerns and show your workforce that these are trustworthy methodologies, you want to publish policies and be very clear and simple on what is collecting it, how it's being collected, where and how it's stored, how long it's being stored, and who can access it and for what purpose. And you don't have to do that. Yes, there will be a huge privacy and security document somewhere that has all the details, but I think you can do that at a very high level, very clearly and simply for people to make them feel at ease. And then finally, you want to be able to offer an opt out to these folks because there are some people that are just not going to be comfortable with this. But that doesn't block you from rolling it out to everyone. Just give them a meaningful alternative. It could be NFC badge plus PIN, and it could be, just back to standard password with a username and password combination. So you don't want to stigmatize or ostracize those people, force them to do something that they're not comfortable with.
Yeah, and you're already doing username and password, so it's not a heavy lift for you to continue having that as a fallback for those users that just aren't comfortable with the biometrics. So that makes
And
sense.
and then, what we saw before is 90% of those people are already satisfied with that. So you should be good.
Yeah, and then I think on the shared device, we talk about this. A lot of retailers are, I would say shared devices are, they're the most cost-effective way to have a
Mhm.
consistent experience across every. I think Walmart did a rollout of Xcover Pro, Samsung Xcover Pros to all their employees, and I've gotten mixed feedback from employees that I talk with when I shop there. But it's, some people love it, some people are lukewarm on it. But I guess most retailers that we work with are using shared devices, which is a device that is in the store and a shift comes in, uses it. Next shift will grab that device if it's charged, or grab it and swap the battery if it's not. So that's the general modality we see for a lot of people. They're using these shared devices. But from that standpoint, what are the things we need to think about for shared devices, particularly with biometrics?
Yeah, for sure. So, like you said, these devices are being constantly grabbed throughout the shift. And it's not like I would pick up a device for my full shift and I would be the only one that touches it. I talked with a customer yesterday who has 20,000 devices across their stores. And he told me that oftentimes three, four, five people are using the same device in the course of the same shift. So what that means is you've got to have fast user switching. If I've got this device, Brett, and then you come and pick it up and you need to do something in a different app that I might not have access to, you need to be able to switch and be in that device under your name in seconds, not 3 minutes. You don't want to reboot the device. You don't want to have to re-download the apps. So the retail grade solution on these devices really has to be rapid user switching. And then you want to maintain that single sign-on across all the applications so that that one biometric scan is going to unlock everything. Because we're really trying to avoid just downtime and dead air. And then you want to look at also the security side of that. So you want to respect session timeouts and locking rules on the device. So, for example, coordinate your session timeouts with the length of a shift, but then also make when a device goes to sleep re-authentication very easy as well, so that you can keep people working and not standing there trying to figure out how to log back into a device.
Yeah, and I like, we've at BlueFletch, we have a biometric solution. I love the demo aspect of, by the time I pick up a device and I power it on, I'm actually like focused on the screen. I'm already back in. And so
Mhm.
it's very frictionless. And so it's easy. It is almost easier to have better security because you could set your timeout windows lower because there's such lower friction when I pick the device and try to get back up into my session. So I definitely think that biometrics make that a lot more advantageous and more secure for the security folks that want to have a shorter timeout period when a device is not in use.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that from a shorter timeout period, but that is definitely true. Because of the speed, you could make the timeout period much, much shorter. And I know that also in some shared device environments, there's a concern that the people that originally signed into the device are the people that are completing the work. So if you had shorter session timeouts forcing more authentications, you could definitely confirm that the correct person is doing the work as well. So there's some compliance side of it just from a HR perspective, but then from the security side too, it's more robust.
I definitely had that conversation with a shipper that did high value cargo,
Mhm.
where the person signing the manifest when something got inbound or outbound, they wanted to validate, and biometrics gave them 100% accuracy. You and I could share a password, or I could log in, hand you a device, but they were
Yep.
actually forcing a biometric reauth when one of those transactions occurred. So they know the exact person that was doing the transaction. I couldn't pick up Lee's device that he left on the desk and actually start closing out the manifest saying there were only 12 containers on the truck when there were actually 10. So
Yeah.
that was an interesting case too, because I didn't even think of that, the benefit of biometrics there, but it gave them a high level confidence of who actually completed that load and did the closeout.
Yeah, and that even translates outside of, retail into if you think about like regulated industries, or even things where privacy is a concern around like medication dispensing or things like that.
Yeah, or in retail, I think the other one too I think about is like POS overrides.
Oh yeah.
If somebody knew your login or code and did a POS override for, a $50 discount on a $55 item for their friends, it's comes back to you, even though you weren't the person that had that transaction.
Brett, would be the one giving out free chickens all day, right?
Oh no, not me, not me. Robust and in edge conditions. This is the next area to think about when you're looking at implementation. And edge conditions are always my favorite because people will ask, "What are the edge conditions?" And I'm like, "Well, you're not going to know until you actually pilot it." But I think some of the ones we do know about are what is it? Network, the actual physical aspects, so temperature, humidity, gloves. Like temperature is an interesting one. Like when things are very hot or very cold,
Mhm.
different devices have different aspects. But I guess, Lee, is there anything else you could think of when you think of the edge cases that people should look at as they're piloting and testing a biometric solution?
Yeah, I think, the two you mentioned are critical, obviously, from a network connectivity, and then also just physical limitations of heat, but also there's things like if you're wearing any sort of PPE, gloved hands, wet hands, dirty hands, you need to think about that. But then your solution needs to work offline or with intermittent connectivity. So think about, we've talked about this in other podcasts too, but maybe some sort of on-prem backup if you're working in an environment where the power goes out in the store a lot. You also want to optimize for real world lighting, real world motion, and real world conditions. So don't just test this in the lab at corporate. Actually, go hand this to an associate in the back of a store and you'll figure out pretty quickly what the edge cases are that you hadn't thought of. So what you want to do is just be aware of those things in the real practical way. And then I'd say the biggest part is the way we worded this is you want to fail fast and clearly. And what that means is in a situation where biometrics is your preferred methodology for authentication, if that's not working because of maybe one of those things that we just described, you want to have a simple backup that's readily available immediately. So, and it's not the 45-second entry if you can avoid that. So you have options like alternatives like NFC plus a pin that you can do if face isn't working because it's particularly dark, or maybe you're wearing a mask that day, something like that.
Yeah, 100%. The next area we had an implementation, area six, was just make sure you understand how to integrate with your existing identity and your existing endpoints. And I think this is maybe a little bit of a dig on some solutions I've seen out there where they want you to drop in their identity provider and then federate that to yours and refederate all the apps or have all the apps where they have a trust to a new identity provider specific to the biometric. And I think that is a very expensive lift for IT and
Mhm.
creates a lot of friction. So I think as you're looking at solutions, understand, does it work if you're on Entra? Does it work with Entra? Does it work with Okta? How does it handle integrate with your multi-factor? So if you require MFA, how does it work with that in certain situations? How does it work with conditional access policy? So there's a lot of, I think it's more of an IT one to think about, but as you're looking at vendors, make sure you look at vendors that can tie in easily with your existing solution without you having to, rip out your entire intra ID infrastructure and put in something new.
Yeah, or something next to it, like you said initially. I like the phrasing we came up when we were talking about this is you don't want to have to create a parallel security universe in addition to what you're already maintaining.
Yeah.
Because, again, that's another operational expense, right? So there's the software cost that goes along with that. And then are you going to have to add extra IT people to maintain the system that you just created or that you bought into? I think another part of that is that you have to make sure it works with your existing device management tools where you're governing these endpoints. So that's something to consider as well. And then I think the other one, and it goes back to what you said, Brett, about integrating with your existing identity providers, you want to use standards-based SSO whenever possible. So that's something to talk to your vendors about too. So that means like OAuth, OIDC, or MSAL. You don't want to try to use something building your own auth standards because it just gets very, very unwieldy. And then I think finally, when you're thinking about this from an IT perspective, with your security and integrating this, you want to make sure you're having auditable logs that can be pulled out and correlated with your point of sale system, with your security systems, and also with HR, so that you have a unified like system of truth in order to understand, who was working when, where they were working, what applications they may have been using, where they were in the store, what transactions they were completing on the point of sale system.
Yeah, I think it definitely increases your security posture. One caveat, when Lee says standards-based SSO, uh, I'll throw the word modern standard-based SSO in there. I think we had somebody that's like, we use DB2 RBAC on our IBM AS, and I'm like, nope, nope, we're not going to support the S400s. Do you have anything newer? And so I think it's if you do have that, it might be time to look at maybe some other pieces first before you look at biometrics and getting those pieces in place.
Yeah, with that example, there's definitely a crawl, walk, run kind of thing going on there.
Yeah, good. Make sure you have some of the underlying foundational pieces in place. The next one, from a implementation standpoint, it's just understanding the operational sustainability.
Hmm.
So, does it reduce support load? Does it, do you have reporting on actual usage that your IT and operations teams can have? But I guess for when you think of operational support, like what are the things that come to mind as you talk with clients, Lee?
Sure. So I think what they need to look at is, hey, I've got this up and running, or I've set it up. I've spent weeks or months configuring this. Now it's day one and day two, and I've got to run this on a day-to-day basis. You want to make sure that you're reducing that support load. So you want to have the centralized policy on how this is working, meaning you can enable or disable biometrics by a particular store. If your company owns more than one store banner or brand, enable it or disable it by banner or brand, or even by region, so that you don't have this really messy, non-centralized version of how people are logging in. Because what you're going to want to be able to do is report on this at a macro level, because you need to understand adoption rates, since success and failure rates of the actual biometrics working. You understand the login times. Like if you were averaging over 30 seconds before and now you're down to, let's call it 3, you want to be able to understand that so you can report on it. And then the other side of it, correspondingly, you're going to want to look at your help desk tickets pre and post deployment, because if you can't measure these things, you're not going to be able to prove that ROI. And as the COO, as the CIO, these are the things that you are ultimately judged on. And these are the things that are going to help the people on your team save time and realize advantages for the company.
That's a good segue into the last thing we're going to talk about here this in this podcast. But I think the thinking through how do I go from nothing to this of, and I think there's really three phases to this. And the first one is setting up a pilot or doing a pilot of this technology. Maybe you could talk about some of the key points, Lee, you coach clients on when you think about a pilot phase.
Sure. So we actually had a customer They did a 5,000 device deployment, and prior to working with BlueFletch, or prior to implementing BlueFletch, they actually did a before and after single sign-on, how long it took to sign into an application manually versus single sign-on. So what they did and what we often recommend to people is establishing a baseline of login times, ticket volumes, associate satisfaction scores, like where they are now. Because if you don't understand where you're starting, it's not going to give you a good way to measure how much before and after success that you have. So once you've got that baseline there, you then want to go and find store champions. As everybody knows, no one likes to change, and it's only going to take one or two people who really don't want to change to be vocal about it to ruin it for everyone else. So if you can identify store champions who are really the early adopters, who love to push themselves, love to push the technology, and are going to be evangelists inside of your facilities, definitely look for those people. So we talk to our customers about that as well. Because they will ask us like, well, how do I roll this out? And you say, well, pick a subset of users in a subset of stores who you know are going to be your champions and start with them.
I,
If you're,
I also find like that champion is sometimes the guy that complains the most is the best guy to have
yeah,
because if you A, he's going to give you the most feedback and find the most edge cases, and then B, if you can win him over everybody else in the store is like, oh, Steve's happy with this, it must be ready to go. So yeah, a lot of times people will go with like, who's the most tech savvy guy? I'm like, maybe who's the guy that complains the most? Go with that guy.
yeah. I mean, I think sometimes those people complain too, because they don't feel heard, and giving them a chance to participate can really turn someone like that around. And so if you're using shared devices, most of the people we're talking about here are, consider leveraging facial recognition because you're not going to be restricted the way you would be with fingerprints. So fingerprints, even though it is the most familiar way for most people based on their personal device usage, it's not necessarily realistic in a shared environment. So make sure you pick the modality of login that's going to make the most sense for the device type and the device landscape that you have. And then going back to what I mentioned just briefly a second ago, start with a defined subset of stores or even a section of a store first, and then go from there. Pick a particular type of device first, like don't go point of sale, clock, kiosk, PC, and shared device all at the same time. Start in little pieces. It's worth it to do it that way because it helps you manage those store champions and build from there. And then also helps you understand the edge cases that are going to cause problems at a limited level rather than en masse, where if something gets out and breaks, it's a lot harder to bring people back around.
Yeah, and then once you have your pilot, I think phase two we talk about is refinement, which is I think the listen and understand the edge cases, and then continue iterating. Can you talk a little bit about the learnings there, the experiences we have there?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk with customers, we often tell them, now that this is rolled out, work on collecting structured feedback from these associates. Like, is this faster? Is this more frustrating? Is this less frustrating? And then based on what they say, be prepared to make some changes. If there's going to be privacy considerations or privacy questions, go back to what we talked about earlier with clear, repeated, simple explanations of how this data is stored and used. And then, use that pilot to find these edge cases that you didn't find in the lab, because they always come up when you put a device in a user's hand. They're going to find something that you never thought of, because you wouldn't think somebody would use a device in that manner, but maybe they do every day. So what you're going to be able to do is use this phase, this pilot, to refine how the workforce is enrolled and switches over from your old methodology for authentication to the new one with biometrics, understanding like the offline behavior and also understanding failback or fallback flows. If biometrics don't work, what is the next method for authentication going to be, and how easy is it to pivot from biometrics isn't working because I'm wearing a mask? If I need to do NFC plus PIN, how does that work? If I need to scan a barcode plus a PIN, how does that work? And make sure you have a clear process for that.
Got it. And once you've nailed all that and have what you think is a good product and you're ready to, call it scale to enterprise, what are some of the things to go, lessons learned there as we've helped, go from a pilot of a couple stores and iterating and solving those issues to getting rolled out across a chain of stores or multiple banners in a chain.
Yeah, so I think part of what the pilot does is it allows you to have success metrics, right? So begin the rollout en masse after the pilot proves what you've identified as your success metrics. So an example here would be faster logins, fewer help desk tickets on password resets, and then higher satisfaction scores from your associates. So if you start with a clear goal that the pilot is proving, then when you roll out, you'll have something to measure at a broader level to make sure that your pilot is in fact correct. And you're going to standardize on what your primary method of authentication is. In this case, for biometrics for shared devices, it would be face. And then you're going to want to standardize on whatever that fallback is. Maybe it's passwords or badge plus PIN or barcode plus PIN, whatever you decide is that secondary. Make sure you have a clear 1, 2, 3. This is how you authenticate on these devices, so people know what to expect.
I think the last piece of that was change management, which I know you're a big proponent of. No one likes getting a bunch of software dropped in their lap and being told, "Hey, there's new software."
Yep. That's my favorite thing in the world. Like, we did something. We didn't tell you what we were going to do, but here it is. Do you like it? So yeah, it's an HR consideration. It's a employee experience consideration. It's a relationship consideration. It's not just a tech deployment, right? And you need to be thinking about this from a legal perspective, when we're talking about the privacy side of things, and also if you happen to be in an area where unions are involved, you're going to want to make sure you involve all those stakeholders early on because you need to talk about employee feedback, security safeguards, privacy safeguards, and then just also data in terms of how much better this is allowing the people to perform their jobs.
Yeah,
And then,
there's two things I like around this. I've seen that companies do that have rolled out big solutions. One is the store expert, store advocate. Back to the initial guy that was the first guy, getting him to be like an advocate for the store, or finding somebody in the store who's a strong advocate and can
Mhm.
talk to other people. And then the other one is train the trainer programs, which
Yeah.
is you don't have to take a trainer team to every store. If you can get one person to come in and go to the district office and learn how the thing works, and then go back and teach their store about it. So find those trusted advocates and identify those people you want to be train the trainer program associates.
Yeah, and I think it goes a long way for employee morale too when you've got a group of people who you're taking to the corporate office or the district office and enabling them and giving them ownership and a stake in the success of this process. That's going to be much more likely to succeed on the ground in the store when your associates feel like they were helping solve the problem and they had a say in how it was rolled out and how it was implemented.
Got it. I think we're coming up at the end here, but Lee, I appreciate you walking through this. The There will be a white paper BlueFletch is going to publish with the outputs from the survey and a lot of the survey data pieces for folks to take a look at. So keep an eye out for that. And then we are also demoing some of the newer biometrics capabilities that BlueFletch has rolled out this year at NRF, the upcoming NRF. So if you're interested in that, come by, take a look at the booth. But as always, Lee, appreciate you talking through this and sharing some of your experiences with me today.
For sure. Looking forward to NRF in January in New York as well.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Take care.
Thank you for tuning into the Frontline Mobility Edge. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe for more content every month. If you'd like to learn more about BlueFletch, check out the link in the description or visit us at bluefletch.com. See you next time.